everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Quandra Spates. I'm co-hosting the show with Patrick Brutus and our guest today, Jose Wilson. We represent Help One Save One, and if you're watching a live interactive show here on CAN TV, you can please call in at 312-738-1060. Once again, that's 312-738-1060. Want to thank you all for tuning in tonight. Once again, this show is presented to you by Help One Save One. Help One Save One is a community-inspired organization. One of our main objectives is to educate and empower the community with information designed to inform and enlighten. Our email address is helponesaveone@hotmail.com. The telephone number is 312-313-6977. And our Facebook page is Help One Save One. So last week, we presented to you a very interesting topic, and that was on, what was last week on?
Family law.
Family
law. With Maria Barlow as our guest.
Attorney Maria Barlow. Please check it out. It is on YouTube. You can definitely check it out for us. As mentioned in previous shows, that the Kerner report will be the foundation to lay in the groundwork to support the topics we will be discussing over the remaining few weeks. It is our intent to create a progressive series of informative discussions regarding our journey as African American people by examining where we once were, where we wanted to be in the past versus where we are today. Today we have another interesting topic. We're going to be talking about restorative justice and its impact on the African American community. Patrick Brutus is going to introduce our guest.
Thank you, Quandra. Again, welcome to our show, Chicago. Good evening. And first, let me introduce our guest, Jose Wilson. Jose Wilson earned a master's degree in mental health counseling from Walden University. He is also a psychotherapist and the director of workforce programs and clinical services for the North Lawndale Employment Network right here on Chicago's West Side. He is a chapter co-author of the 2017 cutting-edge book, Cultural Awareness and Competency Development in Higher Education. The chapter is titled Multicultural Counseling, Competencies. Why is it difficult to apply what we know? He also co-facilitates Building Bridges, Building Connections, a MetLife Foundation nationally recognized strategy for engaging community and police. Jose is also the founder and co-chair of Antonio's Response, a violence reduction strategy launched to families when there is a loss of a youth 9 and under in Chicago's Greater Grand Crossing neighborhood due to violence. He is a community activist and recipient of several community awards, including the Gary Comer's Martin Luther King Community Champion Award. He is a steering committee member for the first even 100% restorative justice community court launched in September 2017. Also, and finally, he believes that knowing and believing in something is not enough to change a situation or circumstance. Knowing and believing in action will. We welcome our guest, Jose Wilson, to the studio today to the CAN TV broadcast of Help One Save One. But first, we're going to run this short video for you.
Court system in the North Lawndale neighborhood. It's going to be called the Restorative Justice Community Court, and it will allow young, nonviolent offenders to take accountability for their actions instead of serving jail times. Joining us this morning is Cliff Nellis of the Lawndale Christian Legal Center and Jose Wilson from the North Lawndale Employment Network. Guys, thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you.
We talk a lot about taking back our neighborhoods, and there have been a lot of studies that show you can't simply just lock these guys up and throw away the key. Your program aims to address that.
Absolutely.
That is correct. The Restorative Justice Community Court is partnering with the North Lawndale Community Restorative Justice Hub, which is a collaboration of community stakeholders who live, work, and worship in the community. Jose and I are part of that collaboration. So this court, for it to be successful, is going to rely heavily on community-based services as alternatives to incarceration, based on restorative justice practices and principles. And it's for nonviolent offenders, 18 to 26 years old.
Yeah, so not everyone qualifies. Sort of lay out the qualifications you have to get in the program.
Well, sure. It's for 18 to 26-year-old nonviolent offenders, felonies and misdemeanors will be brought into the court.
Staggering statistics, 7 out of 10 males who live in North Lawndale have a felony conviction. What does this do to a community? What does it do to families that you have dad locked up?
You know, when you have that number of dads locked up in the community, it devastates the community. It pulls out of the home, the provider for the home, a support system, a role model. And so what's really exciting about the Restorative Justice Community Court is that we're able to now begin to help repair and rebuild community by preventing some of those individuals who may receive a felony conviction to have an alternative to receiving felony convictions. And so, so we know right now, for example, also in North Lawndale, that the unemployment rate is 18.5%, which is twice that of the city of Chicago. And so all these factors really contribute to community being in trouble and also in being decimated, basically.
It's a new idea.
Jose, that was exactly 2 years ago today. That was a great moment for the community.
Yes.
To launch this initiative and to see the beginnings of what was going to come, what we know today to be in practice, reality. Since then, though, the Restorative Justice Community Court, managed by the Circuit Court of Cook County, opened at the brand new UCAN facility on the west side at their headquarters location. What has happened since? Where we are today? What's going on? Tell us, give us an update.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick, and I think, and thanks also for the great introduction. Since the court launched in September of 2017, we have a presiding judge. Her name is Judge Colleen Sheehan. We have right now in the court individuals who are receiving services, just almost 50 people, young men between ages of 18 and 26. We have really began to codify and finalize our systems in which we are working with the young men in our system. And so we continue to get the word out. We continue to improve our capacity. We continue to work through issues as we move forward. And so, so we've been very excited to know that we have launched the court. We are improving on the court, and we have young men who are being serviced by the courts.
So since the court has launched, Jose, tell us how many folks have been affected in a positive way, and what happens after they go through a restorative justice session, or is it a pronouncement by the court? What happens in that process of once an affected party comes before the bench?
So what happens is, working with the public defender, working with state's attorney, when individuals come in, they are screened in. And so, as mentioned in the video selection earlier, the individuals that we're serving currently are those who have nonviolent offenses. And so these are typically drug cases. There may not be a direct victim. And so in those cases, when we get into the process of actually dealing with those cases, you have surrogates who serve in peace circles to resolve those issues. And so once the person is screened into the court as being appropriate for the court based on geographical location, based on the type of offense, then they are assigned a caseworker, they are screened, and so they are actually brought before the courts and begin, what happens is once they come into the courts, once they've been identified, then we are looking at ways to help them to serve in a peace circle. So what happens is once they get into the court system, because it is a restorative justice community court, one of the methods we are pursuing to create resolution is through peace circles. And so then it's a volunteer process. So those, when they're screened in, it's not compulsory. And so they are asked, hey, do you like to, in lieu of going through a regular traditional system, would you like this particular options? And so I failed to mention that earlier. Mm-hmm. And so once they get in, then part of the work of deciding what's going to happen between the offender and also the victim is to sit in peace circle. And so a peace circle is a method, it's a technique, it's a tool used to begin to repair the harm that's been caused by one person to another. And so in that peace circle, that's where the work takes place. That's what's really unique about being the 100% restorative justice community court, because it is with community, it is with the judicial system in the context of this peace circle that the resolution is determined. The resolution comes out in what we call a repair harm agreement. And so all parties in this process agree that if the harm that has been done is going to be repaired by this particular process. And so the process or the solution is very much customized based on the person.
So when you say Restorative Justice Community Court, are these offenses violent offenses, non-violent?
Good question. They're all nonviolence. And so I think that what happens is right now, as the court started, we are starting with nonviolent offenses. I think it is our goal long term, once we have really, really worked with this system and worked all of the kinks, is to look at expanding the type of cases that the court is actually seeing. And so, so either then or now, I think what will not change is that it's going to be a voluntary opportunity for the offender and also for the victim. So what's really interesting is that in order for the cases to go through, once the initial assessment is done by all the judicial people, then this is the idea, an option that's presented to the offender. And so once the offender says, listen, this is something I think is great, and if I do these things, I will prevent me from having a felony conviction, then we also have to go to the victim. The victim must also agree to voluntarily participate in this process.
So currently, do the victims play a role in this right now as it's set up in this initial phase of the 1-year program so far?
Absolutely.
So the victims do come back to the court to appear and work this process of peace with the offender.
Yeah, so the victim,
Wow.
so what happens is, and so what's really unique and what's powerful about restorative justice and this particular tool, using Peace Circle as a means to resolve conflict within community, is that the victim and the offender get a chance to sit in circle with people who are family or friends to the victim, and also folks who may represent, the offender. The goal is to not just to be punitive when we see incident that takes place where someone harmed another person, is to figure out the why behind the behavior. So for example, when a person hurts another person, the question is not to jump to a punitive action, but it's begin to ask the question, what's going on behind the behavior? So in the context of a peace circle, the victim gets a chance to hear why the person, the offender, actually committed the particular act.
Wow.
And so then the victim also has the opportunity to hear the why behind the offender's behavior, because if the person, let's say it was a minor situation where the person stole something from them, and so the question may come, well, why did you do that? Why did you steal this from me? And so then they may say, hey, listen, the reason why I stole this item from you or I committed this particular crime is because I was trying to feed my family. And so now what happens is that situation is contextualized. The person has a reason, an understanding why the act was created, and then it creates empathy on both sides. And so it all starts, though, with two people with a support system agreeing to actually participate in the process. And then once the process is unfolded, once it's completed, a repair harm agreement is reached. They say, well, listen, you stole this from me. It costs $50, for example. And so then the repair harm agreement may be for that person to actually pay back that money. So there's restitution. And so then once that's said and done, you have restored relationships. You have restored the person back to community. This young man, young woman, right now we're only serving men, will not have a felony conviction, which if they get the felony conviction, we know that it caused a whole lot of other problems with a felony
So
conviction.
that's exciting because there's an aspect of it that's akin to an expungement, so to speak. Not expungement in the explicit terms,
Yeah,
but
right.
in a way that the felony conviction will go away if they go through this process successfully.
That's right.
That's
right.
fantastic for these young brothers who will then come out as no older than 26 years old. In
Right.
most cases, would still have a second chance, third chance for a brighter future.
That's right.
Well, I kind of want to talk about the social component with this. As you've mentioned, restorative justice has been suggested as a means to deal with disproportionate minority confinement and other social problems within the community of color, specifically the Black community. So when these young men in the neighborhood are locked up or shot and killed, yet the women are often forgotten and left behind to deal with all these other issues that comes along with that. Can restorative justice programs address the social component? Or is there any type of counseling that comes along with that?
Absolutely. So what happens is once these young men, see most of the individuals who are serving time in county or state prisons, they're in for low-level drug offenses. And so once you pull these individuals out of the home, then it creates financial stress on families. And so then families tend to do what they need to do ability to take care of themselves. A lot of time it's the male who's taken out of the family, and so then young men are growing up, without that male role model, as well as a separation of income. And so then what happens is, by us having a restorative justice community court in the North Lawndale community, then what it does is it provides the opportunity for that young man who qualifies with a low level drug offense or case to have an opportunity to have that case really just thrown out. And so, it's, as Patrick was saying, it's similar to an expungement, but the issue is it never goes to that point. It never gets to that point. Right. The case just goes away, right? And so once a person completes the conditions of the repair harm agreement, then that case is actually dismissed by the court. So because of that, then you have young men who are able to stay and support their families. We know that when they are young men, when the man is in the household and you have two incomes, then the child has more support, specifically financially and emotionally, from the father. And so then they are less likely to go out and commit crimes and have the kind of support they need to become successful, sustainable citizens in the city.
Jose, this is such an interesting topic. As we're talking about this today, there's so many questions that come to mind that I feel like I just need to ask. And so, based on your experience, or, I know today it's very shocking for our audience. We're not going to present a lot of factual data with percentages and statistics, which is very rare for us. But if by chance, do you know how many cases where there has been a offender that has gone through restorative justice successfully and has seen release from the system? Has that person, do we know if there are any of those cases that we see the offender commit reoffense and back into the system? Have we seen any failure on the part of them to socially reintegrate themselves back to society, learning the lessons that they've learned from peace circles and restorative justice initiatives?
Good question. I think, so what's important to know for your audience is this, is that the Restorative Justice Community Court in North Lawndale is very unique. There's nothing like it, really in the country. And so there are similar projects that are taking place in New York and San Francisco and Iowa and also other cities or states close to us. But as far as there being a restorative justice community court that's completely 100% restorative, which means that we're relying on community members, we're relying on the offenders, and also we're relying on the victim to say, listen, we are going to resolve this issue completely restoratively. What that means is that we are still too early in the process to have those statistics. And so, for example, we do have young men who have come through the course. We have at least a few, 3 or 4 who have completed the process, and we have, again, as I mentioned earlier, almost 50 that are in the process right now.
So it's still early.
It's still early, right? So in about a year or so, we began tracking the statistics on the successful post-release success rate, recidivism rate. So that information will be coming out within a year or so.
That's fantastic. Awesome. That's great information. Got another quick yes or no question for you. What percentage of the inmates that you and the court have experienced through this program are actually nonviolent offenders? Knowing that the program only serves nonviolent offenders, but how many in the overall pool from 18 to 26 are actually nonviolent? So that, for example, you have 50. Is that out of a possible 2,000? Like, what is the percentage of those folks that are nonviolent to violent? Misdemeanor versus felony.
Yeah, I think for us, the majority of the individuals who we're serving have some misdemeanors, and so that's a small percentage. And so I'm thinking those numbers are probably 10%, but the rest are considered nonviolent offenses. So that'll be the majority of those cases that are coming through our doors are individuals who would be considered having nonviolent offenses, not just misdemeanors.
So there's a great chance for us to still capture a large pool of eligible folks in
the
next
absolutely.
2, 3, 4 years down the line, so we can hopefully see this thing take off, get even better, and serve more to give second chances for more individuals.
That is correct. That is correct.
I have a quick question in terms of this restorative justice process. I know you said it's between the ages of 18 to 26. What about our juveniles? Is this process being used in the juvenile detention centers?
This process right now, not in this form. What's happening right now, we're actually developing a model. And so once the model has been developed, then we'll do a couple things. One, we will determine then, how then can we actually modify the model to serve the younger population. For example, within the school system, you have you have individuals who schools are actually doing peer juries, and so those peer juries are actually supervised by the Chicago Police Department. And what happens is no peer jury situations. They're taking also low-level incidents that can be actually solved by peer jurors, right? And so instead of referring those individuals to the juvenile court system, what happens is they're resolved locally. And so once we have actually tested the model and we have perfected the model, then we will, as I mentioned, one, look at how do we apply this particular tool to juveniles, and then second, how do we then begin to incorporate, more violent offenses? Because what happens is many of our individuals who commit violent acts, and the research demonstrates that most violent acts, murders and homicides, in many cases, they're crimes of passion. A relationship happens and there's a crime of passion.
And the victim
is not there, right?
And I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I believe we had a caller. Do we have a caller? Carla, what's your question or comment?
Oh, thank you. Is this Mr. Williams?
Wilson.
Wilson. Well, okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Wilson.
That's
Yes.
okay.
I applaud you for your program, and I see some of the benefits that could be enhanced in the community. Now, have you looked at some of the root causes of some of the problems that would cause the conflicts that would lead to restorative justice? Like, for example, when you have drugs and guns that are brought into the community, dropped in, and in fact, we go back in history, Richard M. Nixon declared that we're going to drop guns and drugs in the black community and watch it disintegrate. And we're living under White House terrorism today because of his proclamation. So when we see our communities have been villainized deliberately to unjustly incarcerate our community, where do we get justice from? I mean, we see how this process is moving on, and you have your program, and I'm going to hurry up and finish my question, but yeah, the problem is these problems are created outside of our community. How do we address those and show the community and give education to the community of how we can resolve them with looking at both sides of the fence, not just on our side, but look at where it comes from? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, Carla, you asked a really good question, and so what I'm going to do is try to be real brief. But let me just first say this: that with the Restorative Justice Community Court, that is an answer. That's like one answer, but that is on the intervention side and not prevention. And so we think about some of the structural issues that are out there that actually contributes to the crime that we see in our community. You're absolutely right. We know there are systems in place. Like, for example, we have to ask the question: why is it that those individuals who are on death row across the country, 1 in 9 are found innocent, right? And so then it's like if we were to fly in an airplane and 1 in 9 airplanes crash, would we fly? And so, but yet there's kind of this deathly silence. 1 in 3 African American males between the age group that we're serving, will actually in his lifetime, will actually do time in jail or in prison. And so we know there are structural hierarchical issues, racism, that actually contribute to a lot of the conditions we see in our community. And so I think one solution would be definitely for us to identify ways in which we can, as community members and organizers, to continue to reach out and share our knowledge and share our time and volunteering and be a part of the solution in our communities. And I'm sure you, as a caller, understand the value of mentoring. And so those are some really immediate solutions, I think, that can actually deal with some of the problems we're dealing with. Other are structural and have to do with policies that we have to unite around to solve.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, I have a real quick question that kind of goes along with what you were just talking about. So a trend of incarceration has formed like a black hole, moving from generation to the next, mainly in the black community. Our traditional system of punitive justice will only feed this trend. So locking up everyone and throwing away the key is simply not a viable option, as we've been discussing. Mm-hmm. So we've seen this trend more so in the African American community than the white community, Asian community, and many other communities. Why is that? Is it because that they commit less crime than individuals in the African American community, or have they already implemented some type of restorative justice in their own communities that they just haven't shared with us?
I mean, I think that one of the major issues to your question is that, I mean, we are still dealing with issues of systemic racial hierarchy in our country that we tend to kind of stray away from. And so one of the caller earlier talked about just the current White House situation. And so we know that it is not that we're not smarter. It's not that we don't have the ability. I think there are other issues that are racially charged that we need to really take a look at in our country.
So, real quick before we wrap up, I just want to say, if we had, Jose, and you can just give me a yes or no on this,
Okay.
if we had a restorative justice practice in place since the 1970s, being that this particular program is being supported not only at the court level here in Cook County, but also with the state's attorney's office, would we be better off today?
Yeah, I think we would. I think because here's the reality. So it is the intent of the Restorative Justice Community Court, you know, with the Chief Judge's Office, Chief Judge Timothy Evans, and all the stakeholders, all the organizations that represents the North Lawndale hub, is to transform our judicial system so that we don't seek to incarcerate people at the rate that we are currently incarcerating people. In North Lawndale, 77% of all the males have had contact with our judicial system. That's absolutely insane.
Quick question, yes or no? Are we planning on anything on the south side?
Eventually, there's a plan to replicate
Okay,
this.
great.
Wonderful. Well, that
Thank you.
ends our time. I did have a curveball for you, and so I'm going to try to get it in real quickly. So reparations, So we've discussed how punitive criminal justice systems seek to punish those who commit crimes. Restorative justice is also about process for rehabilitating offenders through reconciliation, accountability
Yep.
with victims and the larger community. Restorative justice is particularly a good aspiration for a situation at hand because it ultimately satisfies both the substantive and procedural judicial system. That is, it satisfies both the moral and legal standards of fairness. Can restorative justice be applied the same way in reparations?
Yes or no? Yes or no?
Probably not.
Good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.